Scripture reading before the lesson this morning will be from Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 9 through 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 9 through 10. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all of these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity.
This morning. Good to see Ed and Julie back. You can definitely see what James spoke of in the 5th chapter of James, and we see it all the time, that the prayers of a righteous avail much. So we see that quite often, and it's helped out both physically and spiritually for those that need those prayers, and that God does answer prayers. Well, today I'd like to, my lesson's entitled Fleeting Days. I thought about putting it on PowerPoint, but I thought, no, that makes everybody, sometimes makes people lazy. So I want you to open Scripture today. And plus, we didn't want to put a lot of burden on Trace, but not really, but because he could have handled it. But Fleeting Days. We're going to look at one book today, and that's it. 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes. And you say, oh, no, 12 points? That means he's going to go through all 12 chapters? Yeah, I am. But it's not going to be that long. And what brought me to this is, which some of you know, I've been working in Columbus, Indiana since the last of July, 1st of August, working 4 10s and 2 8s. And driving back and forth every day, 153-mile round trip. So you get to think a lot in that time. So one morning, about 4:30, 4:05, I was thinking, I left the house at 4:30. It's 5 o'clock or whatever. There's a half hour gone that I'll never see again. I know that's kind of probably weird thinking, but I got to thinking that those hours that you're away from home, you never get them back. Or the hours, and this is when you're like fixing oats in the microwave, and you push the button for 1:35. And when that's done, you say, that's another 1:35 gone that I'll never see again. I mean, it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of weird thinking, but it goes so fast. And when I talk about fleeting days, which we'll get into that, and you've seen that in the Scripture, and thank Alan for the prayer and his son for the reading. But those things doesn't come into the mind of people like Camden, 21 years or 20 years old. He don't think about fleeting days. And like Jeff was saying in his morning class, that we're gone. One day you wake up, you're in high school. Next day you wake up, you're married. The next day you wake up, you got grandkids. So it goes so fast. But as you're young, and as a young man, and some of us older guys still feel this way, or think we are this way, 10 feet tall and bulletproof, which we're not. We just think we are. I found that out about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was working on the edge of a stairway and went to bend over it, fell through the stairway. But the scaffold was about 3 feet away, so I tucked and rolled. And so I was okay. But the actual landing, if there wasn't no scaffold, it's a 9-foot drop. So some of you guys in construction know what I'm talking about. But, right, Sean? Anyway, I thought I was fine, but the next day it felt like I'd done an extra 3 or 4 rounds of tricep pulls because my triceps were so sore I couldn't even hardly move my arms because it's where I went down like that. But anyway, so I figured out, well, maybe not as good as you used to be. So anyway, those fleeting days, they go by so fast. And you all could probably remember your grandfather and your grandmother, how they seemed old. Now you're in the same position they were at that time. So, but anyway, I wanted to get into Solomon. Solomon was a great, wise, and rich man. And throughout his life, he tried different things. And I'm going to go through these 12 chapters and hit some points that I think brings out what we go through each and every day, trying to figure out where are we going, what is important in our life. So I want you to go to the first chapter, and I'm going to read like a few verses from each chapter and just kind of comment and go right on through till we come to the conclusion of it. And we all know what the conclusion is, but it's always good to see, hey, this is some things that I've dealt with. This is some things that I am dealing with. And maybe these are some things that you're going to deal with that you don't even know about yet. First of all, he talks about in this, and he talks about himself being the preacher, the son of David. In verse 3, he says, what advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place rises there again. So he says things continue on. So can I get from this? What advantage do I have in all this? Because everything goes the same as it does throughout. Then if you go on down to the 8th verse, he says, all things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. So the man never is satisfied. He's always looking for something. He's always seeing something. And that's what Solomon said. He was trying to figure out why life is what it is. Why am I upon this earth? Because I see things, I want them. I see it, I need them, I want it. I hear things, I keep wanting to hear those things. And I'm not satisfied. I need to be satisfied. How can I get satisfied? Well, and then the last part of this chapter, look at verse 17, and he says, and I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this is also striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Well, how can wisdom do that? How can knowledge bring pain? Wisdom, you understand what's going on around you and see those that are afflicted, those that are losing their souls, and also you see the pain for those that are sick, those that are poor. You're seeing that, and your knowledge results in pain. In other words, you feel for those people. So that's what wisdom and knowledge does. It brings out of it. It says, what is that? What good does that for man? Well, go over to the 2nd chapter. And he talks a little bit about things here that, what's going to satisfy me? Solomon said, I'm going to try everything. Well, if you're the richest man in the world, you probably can try everything. And what did he do? He tried. Well, in verse 2, he talks out, or verse 3, I should say. He said, I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven a few years of their life. So he's trying to figure. He said, well, he's tried everything. He said, we'll go down. We'll see. He tries wine, which everyone knows that, okay, he drinks, but what does that do? It affects your thinking. I mean, you may say, no, it don't bother me, but yes, it does. I've been down the road, so I know it affects your thinking. And sometimes it's not a good way to think. So that doesn't accomplish anything. That doesn't fill that void that you're looking for. So Solomon done what? He said, I went and planted vineyards. I bought possessions. I had everything I could have. And if you read in Chronicles, it talks about even the streets were laid with silver. That's how much silver he had. So silver is just like dirt. It was so plentiful. But he wasn't satisfied with that. So what did he do? He married how many wives? Had 765, I think it was. And I forget, and so many concubines. I can't remember how many concubines. That didn't satisfy him. So he longed for everything, trying to satisfy his soul, his yearning. But deep down, or not deep down, but I think he was being used by God to show man what the futility of these material things are and what's not important. But Solomon took his whole life and tried all these things. So as you go down a little bit further, down to verse 10, he says, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor. This is my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands have done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. He said, I tried everything. I didn't withhold anything from me. And you know what he did, because remember, what was his downfall? His wives and their gods. He went after them. And it turned his heart away from God. And then he goes on and talks about his labor. He labored in everything, but did he gain a lot from that? Let's see. In verse 18 it says, thus I hated all the fruits of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to a man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. And that there hit me. You work all your life for what? To give it to your kids? That's what a lot of people do. That's what, especially in this country. And then also, if you go back in the Bible times, what did Abraham do? He left an inheritance for both his sons. So that's what man has done. But Solomon says, I worked all this thing. And Nick will know what I'm talking about, and Ed too. These men that have built companies, and then they retire, and their sons take over, and the companies go down. That's the way he's telling me. He said, I worked all my life, and then I'm going to get to somebody that don't handle it right. That's kind of vanity and futility. So he's saying that. And so that's his way of thinking. But there is some that had been totally opposite. What their family gave them or their inheritance, they took care of the business, or they took care and built an even bigger business. So you can, and I don't know if anybody knows Al Kite, but Al Kite had Kite, and his sons done the same thing. They built even bigger than what he had. So that can be done. And then we look over to chapter 3. He gives a little more information that helps us understand things. And over in chapter 3, down in verse, let me go down here. First of all, he's talking about in this first few verses here, first 10 verses, talks about there's a time for everything. There's a time to be born, there's a time to die. There's a time to weep, there's a time to laugh. So he goes on down, he says there's a time for everything. He says there's a time to sow, and there's a time to reap, there's a time to love, and there's a time to hate. And in verse 9 he says, what profit is there to the worker from that which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of man to occupy themselves. So God has given man things to do. He has given, what did he start out with Adam? Till the ground, right? First of all, it was in the garden, take care of the garden. But once he left the garden, then he was to till the land. He was to be work the soil and get his sustenance from that. Then in verse 11, he also talks about what God has given man. He has given him the thought of eternity. He said he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. In verse 12 he says, I know there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees all the good in his labor is a gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him, that which has been already, and that which will be already has been. For God seeks what has passed by. Furthermore, I seen under the sun that which is in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked, for every matter and for every deed there is. In other words, he's going to bring to judgment. In other words, he's talking about, I see where right is wrong and wrong is right. But he said everything is going to be brought into judgment. God's going to judge the righteous man. He's going to judge the wicked man. So he's bringing us, trying to get man to see these things that are not important. What is important? The material things are not important. The things of this life are not important. What is important, we'll find out in a few minutes. What man should be yearning to do, what man should be longing to do. Then as you go down into the last verse of this chapter, he says, I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his life, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? He said, be satisfied with what you have. Don't expect that you deserve anything. God will be there and give you what you need and sustain you with what you need. But he says, in that verse, I thought it was kind of interesting. He said, it is nothing that man should be happy in his activities. Never satisfied in his activities. But he said, because who's going to let him know what's going to happen after him? Nobody's going to know. He's not going to know because he's going to be gone. He's going to be passed away. So be satisfied with what you have. And you go to the Apostle Paul, and in our lesson on this morning, all the things that you could go through as a gospel preacher or as a Christian trying to spread the gospel. But what's important? That's what we will find in a few minutes. Now going over to chapter 4. And here it kind of talks about oppression, what's evil about oppression, those people being oppressed, and that there's no happiness in that. If you look in verse 8, he says, there is a certain man without a dependent, having neither son nor brother, yet there was no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, and for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is vanity and a grievous task. In other words, and we can see people, and we've been, probably some of us have been that same way. We work. For what? Wore out. And never see, as the saying goes, stop and smell the roses. Never stop and smell. Then in verse 9 it says, he said, okay, now, if there's two of you, if there's unity, that helps. Because you know what happens with unity? We stand together, we won't fall, will we? That same, what is it? Together we stand, divided we fall. That's unity. If you're not unified, and the church is got to be unified to stand strong against the wiles of the devil. But in that verse 9 kind of gives you that verse 9 through 12 kind of gives you that idea. You got to bind each other together. You got to be strong. Not one person can be this strong and overcome anything. It says two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. In other words, two men working together will create more than just one man trying to do it all himself. Verse 10 says, for if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. So same way, if you would fall into a pit, nobody there to pick you up. But if there's two of you, there's one to pull you out. Help you up off the ground that you fell through. Then in verse 11 it says, furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? So the transfer of heat keeps you warm. And if you've read anything about the Arctic and up in the cold, they lay close and become warm because one man would freeze to death by himself. And then the next one I thought was good. It says, and if one can overpower him who is alone, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn. So if you wind a piece of yarn, you can pull it apart. Put 2 or 3 of them together, a little harder. Same way with a rope. You can have one strand, it'll break easy. But if you have a bunch of them together, it holds. Because that's what a lot of times we do in swinging stage scaffolding. You have rope, and you have a rope grab on it. And that rope, if that scaffold falls, that swinging stage falls, you're hanging by that rope. That rope's what saves your life. Well, the harness you got on, too. But that's what will save your life. A rope, but it's just a regular rope, everything twined together, so it holds tight and it don't break. Then as you go on into the next chapter, he gives you a little more information on how to be towards God, your attitude, your character. And it's kind of little spots that he brings up for us to understand how we are. In verse 1, it says, guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifices of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. In other words, consider how you talk, because you're always in the presence of God, because he is everywhere. He said, consider your words, consider your thoughts. Nobody else may hear them, but God can hear them and know your thoughts and the intention of your mind, or intentions of your mind. So we need to consider and how we speak, how we talk. That's what another thing of the wisdom of Solomon brought to us, that, hey, we need to know how to act. Then as you go down a little bit to the end of the chapter there, he brings up a little more about how to be. He says, here's what I've seen, and this is what he's come to understand. Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting, to eat, drink, and enjoys oneself in all his labor, in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, which God has given him. For this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he also empowered him to eat from them and receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with gladness of his heart. He's saying, if you trust in God and believe that God's going to take care of you physically and especially spiritually, then you won't worry about how many years you have or how many years you have lived, because you're longing for the end. You're longing for heaven. You're longing for the salvation of your soul. Those things, these material things that people fight and argue over, are not going to make a difference. We're not going to accomplish anything. But we need to look to God. Look to salvation of the soul. That's what's important. Everything else will be gone and will be burned up. Then as we go over to chapter 6, see, we're already through, and I still got 10 minutes. We'll probably get through before 10:15, or 11:15, I should say. He talks here about the futility of life, the vanity of life. Let's go down to verse 7. It says, all men's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does a wise man have over the fool? What advantage does a poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eye see is better than what the soul desires. This is futility and striving after wind. He's saying the eyes desire a lot of things, but the soul desires what's good for man. The eyes did not get what's good for man, but the soul desires it. Then verse 10 says, whatever exists has already been named, and it is known that what man is. For he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is, for there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow, for who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? So this is Jeff talked about in his lesson, or his class this morning, like a vapor, like a shadow. Life's gone. What's important? That's what Solomon is finally starting to realize. Hey, there's something more important than all these things that I'm going after, because they're not satisfying me. And then one thing he finds out in chapter 7, that there's one, and your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather has probably told you this at one time or another. He says a good name is better than good ointment. Your name carries a lot of weight, whether good or bad. You could do, and this is, I'm just dealing with construction because I know, your one good job cannot cover up one bad job. One bad job will kill 700 good jobs. So your name is important. Nowadays, it's hard because everything, you got to document everything. I mean, I'm working on a job right now that everything I do, I had to document. I had to take a picture of everything I do. On my iPad, I have like 2,000 pictures because I'm working on a 5-story building. We have to document everything that we do to get paid for it. I can't say, hey, I've done this room, and said, I don't know nothing. Or they could say, hey, we told you to do that. I want a work order, because we've had several times said, superintendents say, I didn't tell you to do that. I don't know nothing what you're saying. So yeah, you have to document, work order, picture, everything to get paid, or my company get paid. So your name is very important. Then he talks about a little bit about wisdom and a little about what that is. He says, wisdom along with inheritance is good and an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. Consider the work of God, for who is able to straighten what he has bent? In a day of prosperity, be happy, but in a day of adversary, consider. God has made the one as well as the other, so that man will not discover anything that will be after him. So what's he saying? He's saying, think of, you may have prosperity, but you may also have bad times. God can handle all of that for you. He said, wisdom is just as good as money if used properly. It'll protect you. And also that wisdom is how to use that money. The knowledge of doing that. Then as you go over to chapter 8, he talks about obeying rulers. And we know all about that. Who set the rulers in effect? God did. And in verse 2 he says, I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil manner, for he would do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? So he's saying, listen to the authority. And God has told us through Paul and through some of the others, obey your leaders. Obey the king. Respect the authority, because God has given that authority. Then verse 16, that same chapter, he said, when I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has been done on the earth, even though one should never sleep day or night, and I saw every work of God, I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though he should seek it laboriously, he will not discover, and though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. So he's saying, man can work the rest of his life and discover all the works of God. I'm coming to realize that God has done things that I'll never, ever see, far and beyond what I could do. A wise man said, I could know those things, but he don't know it all. There's other things that he can learn, other things that he can find out about. In chapter 9, he talks about men are in the hand of God. God is in control. Verse 1, it says, for I have taken all this to my heart and explained is that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything else awaits him. It's the same for all. There is one fate for righteous and one for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice, and for the one who does not sacrifice. As a good man, so is the sinner, and the swearer so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. So, see, he's saying, live according to God. Live righteous lives. He said, because there's a fate that falls all man. And he also talked about there's a fate that falls all beasts, too. Man and beast, same thing. They all die. They all go back to the ground. The soul will go back to God who created it. So we see, as we're getting through this, into the 10th chapter now, we're seeing what Solomon's finally coming to a realization. He's done all his life, throughout his life. He's coming to this realization that maybe all these things he's done is not worth it. And then verse 1 of chapter 10 says, dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. So is a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart directs him toward the light, but the foolish man's heart directs him towards the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. If the ruler's tempers rise against you, do not abandon your position, because composure of allies great offense. So he's saying, think about what you're doing. He says a wise man's heart will go direct him, going to know the way in which he should go. But a foolish man is just going to go blindly. Nothing's leading him except his desires and his lust. Then at the last part, getting into this 11th chapter, it starts now. He's starting to understand, and he's starting to tell us to understand why this book was written, why he's written these things, kind of like a memoirs of Solomon. Verse 1 of chapter 11 says, cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or 8, or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth, whether a tree falls toward the south or towards the north. Wherever the tree falls, there it lies. He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap. Just as you do not know the path of the wind and how the bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God. He says, sow your seed in the morning, and do not be idle in the evening, for you don't know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed, and whether both of them alike will be good. So he's saying, be diligent in what you do. Same way, like he's talking about sow. Sow it in the morning if you had time, sow it in the evening too. Sow it in the evening. Because you don't know which one's going to be the best. Don't be waiting on the weather. Go ahead and do what you need to do. Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the activity of God. You don't even know how the bones are formed in the womb. So think about those things, he said. Be diligent in what you do. And then finally in verse 9 it says, talks about the young man, and this goes along with our verse, our scripture reading. It tells you, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of manhood, and follow the impulses of your hearts and the desires of your eyes. Yet, know, there's that word yet, Jeff. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. What's he saying? He said rejoice in your youth. But remember, you're going to be held accountable for the things that you do. God's going to bring those into judgment. But he says, how are you going to live a happy life? He said, remove the grief. Remove the anger. Because what is it going to do to you? It's going to eat you up. There's not going to be nothing left of you. It's just going to burn and burn and burn and burn until it just eats you completely up. So do away with those things. He said, take that away from your body. Don't put that stuff on your body. He said, because why? Your life is fleeting. Those days are coming quickly where you'll be no more. And finally, the end of the chapter, or the end of the book, here's the conclusion. All these things that I've gone through, here's the conclusion I've come to. And everyone knows what he came to. There in verse 1 it says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and ears draw near to when you say, I have no delight in them. And he goes down a list of things that shows how our lives go. Our physical body keeps deteriorating day after day. He said, you get to the point where your heart's so hardened, you don't want to remember your Creator, because they don't mean nothing to you. You're still not satisfied. And then finally, he said, what's important now? He says, remember your Creator, but there's something else that we have trouble with, especially here in this country and probably other countries too. He said he wrote many words there in verse 11. He has many collections. He said they were given by one shepherd. In other words, he wrote all these things. It says in verse 12, but beyond this, my son, be warned. Writings of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is weary to the body. And that's where we have, in Christian, also, we rely on man's ideas on how to cure problems. Because we feel like man knows more than God does. So we're going to listen to man. He's going to tell us how to deal with our relationships, how to deal with our physical health, and things of that nature. Without us using any common sense, without us even looking in the New Testament or the Old Testament, in the way God handled the situation, and especially Christ. We have several examples of how he lived and the things he went through. He was an example for us. Then in verse 13 it says, the conclusion is, when all has been heard, is fear God, keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring into every act into judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or whether it is evil. So remember that. That's what Solomon said. How many years? I can't remember how many years it was Solomon lived. He ruled, I think, for 40 years. If I was correct. I don't know if I'm correct on that or not. But anyway, all those years, it took him to come to that conclusion. So he's wanting you young people to come to that conclusion before you spend 60 years trying to figure out what's important. And even some of us that are 60 years old, we need to learn what is important. Or 70 or 80 or whatever age may be. We need to learn what's important, because our days are fleeting fast. This year's over and it just seemed like it started. Tomorrow it'll be 2026 and you only know it. What happened to 24 and 25? The reason I said 2026, that's when I want to retire. So I'm hoping them 2 years go. But they'll be here and gone before I know it. But in conclusion to the lesson, I want you to think, what's important? What's important to you? Hopefully, it's what should be. Because everything we deal with daily will go away. And it will help you because it's helped me. I know it'll help you because I'm hard-headed than most people. I read this book probably 10 times this week. I'll tell you, it takes 25 minutes for you to read it from when I got to read it twice a day, or you could read it 4 times a day on the way to Columbus, which is an hour and 10 minutes. I went through it twice. So you can read it. So that's, an hour? And I'm a slow reader, but I listen to it on my AirPod, on the way to work. And sometimes at work I listen to it. But read it over and over and over and over and over, and you'll finally come to the realization everything Solomon went through, that we go through. Because it sounded like it was me talking. Except I wasn't quite as wealthy as he was, but the way he felt, the search is that he was searching for. So I'd like for you to take these and take these thoughts, and hopefully they help a little bit and help you realize what's important. That is your Creator. Because one day we're going to be standing before him. We're going to either be, enter in, thou good and faithful servant, or we're going to hear, I know you not. Enter into the damnation. So if you're subject to invitation, won't you come as we stand and sing?